Hey there, Indigo here. So I have a really incredibly important lesson for you today in the form of a story, but it's a huge lesson for me. And it's one that in this story, you'll see me really learning for that particular time in my life. But I have to honestly confess, this is one that I continue to learn. I continue to learn it in the same context as in the story and also in other contexts. And, it's because this is so essential. This is such an essential part of getting the lives that we want, that if it was easy, you'd just see everybody going around wanting something and then it's theirs. And so this really goes to kind of that fundamental thing that we tend to do that keeps what we want away from us. So one of the fundamental things anyway. So in this story, so by the way, in the last week's Miraculous story, I was talking about how I met my first spiritual teacher. But in reality, that's how I met my root teacher, like someone like where we've had a bond like over a decade and we're really close to each other. And we know that we're going to be doing the spiritual journey together indefinitely, right? So that was the first time that I went to that level. But in this story, I'm going to be talking to you about a teacher I connected with before that for just a much briefer period of time, who never actually officially accepted me as a student. Like when I first went to see him when I first moved to New York, when I moved from Bali to New York City. And I told you in one of the stories how I was at dinner with all these different Buddhist students and one of them had invited me. Well, the person who had invited me had also invited me to meet his teacher. And when I first got to see his teacher, hey, Diversely, good to see you. When I first went to see his teacher, I said, oh, I want you to be my teacher. I'm looking for a spiritual teacher. And he says, I think you should shop around. And I'm like, no, I don't want to. Oh, thanks for the likes. I appreciate that. I was like, no, I don't want to shop around. I know I want you to be my teacher. And he's like, oh, I think you should shop around. And for like a year, every time I would say anything to him about, being his student, he would tell me I should shop around. Meanwhile, over that year, I got really close to his most advanced students, to the point where my life, the only friends I had work, and then my friends were all those really super advanced students. And so then he started this program that was just for like the most advanced students. And I thought, my life is dedicated to being spirit-led. I may not have as much experience, as these people, because I'm, new, but I want to be, these are my friends. Like we hang together, right? We're at the same level. And he wouldn't let me be in that class. So every day on Sunday, it was an all-day class. Every day on Sunday, all my friends disappeared. And I had like nothing to do, nowhere to go. I would just like be at home because I hadn't, there was no work, there were no friends. And I didn't know anybody else in the city because I hadn't been there that long. So that's just, I'm giving you this context, okay? So at this one point, so you can see I was always kind of like trying to get in, right? I was like that poor little, sidekick kid trying to hang out with the big kids in a sense, like never quite getting totally in, right? Although my friends weren't like that. It was just the teacher who was like that. But my friends were like, oh yeah, we did this. And they would tell me everything they were learning and everything. So anyway, so that's the context. So one day there was the highest female Buddhist teacher in the world. She was known as, and her name was Justin Kuchok. And so she was coming from like Seattle, and her husband, who was also a teacher, he was coming with her, and there was going to be this special teaching that they were going to give. And so I was in the insiders group, even though I wasn't in that particular group with my friends that was like the advanced students that were all day Sunday. I was kind of in the inner circle. So before the teachings happened, oh, thanks so much for the likes. Oh, hey, Don. Hey, Imani. Good to see you. I'm so glad you made it. So do please go back and watch the very, very beginning, the first few minutes where I was kind of setting up like what's the lesson here, although I actually kind of wrote it a little bit. So anyway, I'm just trying to add it all up. So I'm there with just these handful of students, and we're waiting for this female teacher and her husband to arrive. along with the teacher of the center, Lama Pema. And so finally they come, and we're all waiting outside to greet them. And then as they come out of the car, as Lama Pema walks past me, he says, "Don't run away." And I'm thinking, is he crazy? Like, I've been trying to get him to accept me as his student for a year. I've been trying to get him to let me be in the more dedicated students program ever since he created it. Why would I run away? I'm finally getting a little bit of something of the insider track. I'm not running away, right? So anyway, we go upstairs, and then he comes to me. He calls me into the room where it's just him and the teacher. So it's just the three of them and me. And sorry, I have the sniffles a little bit. Excuse me. Allergies. So he calls me in and he says, we want you to go and make some copies for the teaching. And so he hands me this huge book. It's like this big, like it's huge. It's not like a Western style book. It's bound in a totally different way. And, it's like really big. And so he says, "I want you to make some copies of the teaching that she's going to be teaching from tonight. And so if there's a Kinko's up the street, so please go there and make the copies." I'm like, sure. I'm like glad to be given a task, right? And so he's like, then he starts going into all the details of exactly how I'm going to make the copies. Like, I kid you not, I was like, now, if the paper is this size, then orient it like this, and then make the copy like this, but if the paper is this size by this size, then and he's going on and on and on. And I keep saying, I know how to make copies. Just tell me what. He's like, well, I've written down, like, do this page to this page, and then do this page to this. And he's just going on and on. And I'm like, Lama Pema, just tell me all the pages you want, and I promise I will make the copies as large as whatever paper I can find. And I'm like, I've been doing administrative work in one form or another, like, for a decade by then, right? Like, I'm like, I know how to make copies, okay? But then something in me starts kicking in, because I realize the other lamas are sitting there and they've never met me before. And so the way he's talking to me is as if I must be an idiot. And then I think, but they don't know I'm smart. And so they're going to think I really am an idiot because of the way he's talking to me, because he presumably does know me, right? So then I started to resist, because I couldn't tolerate the idea that they would think I was dumb. And so I would start arguing with him, like, no, I should do it like this if the paper, and then he just got worse. And I swear, after half an hour, we were still standing there with him telling me how to make copies. So finally, I don't know how I got him to finally stop, but at a certain point, I think I just stopped saying anything. I was just like, okay. And then he finally was like, okay, go. And he says, okay, it's up the street. So I'm carrying this huge book, and I'm walking up the street, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm walking. It's a hot summer. It's an August day in New York City. Really hot. I'm carrying this heavy book, and I walk for so long. And then I had a cell phone, and so I called back to the office, and I said, "Are you sure it's up this same street? Because I've been walking now like 10 blocks and I haven't found it." They're like, "Oh yeah, just keep going. You'll get to it eventually." It was, once I finally got there, it was right outside a subway stop. And where I had left was also 1 block from a subway stop. And I had a Metro card that meant I rode for free. I could have just taken the train 2 stops, but they acted like it was right up the street. It was 2 stops on the train. That's like a mile. So I was so angry. I was so hot and so irritated. Now I go inside. I think, okay, at least I'm just going to give the book to the guys behind the counter. Because, Kinko's, you could say, make me copies of these pages, right? And then you just pay them. So that's what was my plan. But get this, I get up to the counter, I give them the instructions. They're like, "Oh, we can't photocopy this book." I'm like, "What are you talking about? You can't photocopy this book?" And they're like, "There's a library stamp on the first page." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's from my library. Like the llamas, that it's their library book, like from their library, they're asking me to make the copies." And the guy looks at the book, and it's all written in Tibetan, by the way. The whole book is in Tibetan, except for the library stamp, thank you. And then he looks at me, and he looks at the book, and he looks at me, and he's like, no. I'm like, really? My library, really? So anyway, he would not make the copies. He says, there's a machine over there. You know, there are several machines in the room. He says, you can make the copies yourself. We won't stop you from making the copies, but we cannot make copies of a library book. So I go over to the machine, and I'm trying to make the copies of this huge book, but it's huge and it's not bound correctly. And it was like, I was there for like an hour, and there got to be this really long line of people waiting because there are only 3 machines in the room, and I've had one for an hour. So basically everybody else is having to really just use 2 machines, right? Because I'm like, it is taking me forever. Every time I make a copy, part of the thing is gone. So I have to keep redoing it. And then it's like this page to this page and this page to this page. I know they were not buying the Tibetan thing. So anyway, I finally finished the copies. It took me over an hour. And of course I had walked there, so that had taken me half an hour. Thankfully, of course, I took the train back, but altogether I was gone like 90 minutes. And so I finally got back to the place, having just done my best of getting every page, the complete page, on the largest size paper that I could get to make the whole page, right? So I get there, and as soon as I walk in, one of the other students says, oh, you came back. And I'm like, what? Of course I came back. And they're like, well, the lamas all left for dinner, and Lama Pema, he said that he thought you weren't going to come back. And I was like, of course I came back. But it was like, I had to walk a mile carrying this heavy book in the August heat. And then I had to make the copies myself, and then I had to get back. And, you know, it took some time. So anyway, then I was just tired, and I went upstairs and I laid down. You know, like when you're really hot and tired and stressed, like you just have nothing left. So I just went upstairs and lay down. And then they came back. And then, you know, we all went in, and the other people started arriving for the teachings and everything, right? And then I see the teacher, the woman, and they've cut. So like, let's say there was this huge page, like this big, right? And then there's like you know how a comic strip is? It's a line across, then another, and then another. So imagine it was a comic strip just written in Tibetan with no pictures. And they had cut each of the slips so that a page where it had been 4, it was now just 1, and it was like a book. The whole book was just this size. So I basically only needed to get 1 square on any given page. I didn't need to get all 4. I just needed 1. Like the 1 piece of instruction I actually needed him to give me, that they were going to cut the page into strips. That's the one thing he didn't tell me. I could have made much larger copies because I could have done it like this, right? And the woman, who's like an elderly woman, I could see her straining with her glasses, just trying to read the text. So she's giving the teaching, right? So she's got to read it. And she's just straining over every word because it's so small. I was so mad. I was like, I could have done this right, but I didn't do it right. And now the teaching's affected for everyone because he gave me every piece of information about photocopies except the 1 piece of information I needed. I was so upset. And I was like, now they're really going to think I'm dumb. He told me all that stuff, and I still made the copies wrong. So do you see there's a theme here, right? All right. So I was beating myself up for that, and I pretty much missed the whole teaching. I don't even know what she said. Like that teaching went right past me because the whole time I was just brewing emotionally inside. All right. So fast forward now. Okay. So actually, in between, I called one of my friends who was one of the advanced students, and I explained this to her, and it's like, he's teaching you. That was a lesson. The whole thing was a lesson. I'm like, well, I didn't get the lesson. So how to make photocopies. But anyway, so fast forward maybe a month or 2 later, and there's a Sunday, and again, all my friends are in the advanced class with him, and I'm the one just stuck home by myself, and I get a call from his like most senior students, excuse me again, allergies. So I get a call from his most senior student in New Jersey. And again, I'm in New York. I'm in, where was I? Washington Heights. I'm in Washington Heights, Cabrini, those of you who know New York. And they're over on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, not too far, but I didn't have a car. So I get a call from her and she says, Lama Pema is supposed to be in class today with all your friends, but he hasn't been able to go yet because there's this event coming up for the Tibetan community, and he was responsible for sending out all the invitations to the community, and they're due tomorrow, but he hasn't even made them yet. And he's like, all the other students are in this class. Like anyone else we could ask is already in the class, sitting there waiting for him to arrive. He's not going to be able to, he has to go to class. Can you come over and make the copies? Can I come over and make the photocopies? Of course, I said yes. And so I had to like take a bus, and then she met me on the other side to drive me to the house. And so I was thinking I'm going to just like do these copies because he's got to go, right? What does he do? He's sitting there. All those kids or young people are waiting for him in the city, and he's in New Jersey. And I finally get there. And what does he do? Of course, he starts explaining to me how to make the photocopies. And I'm like, I get it, Lama Pema, you've got to go. Just go. I'll make the copies. It's just like I'm just making a copy of a flyer, for God's sake. But no, he goes on and on. But this time, he only went on for about 5 minutes. Not because he gave up after 5 minutes, but because after just 5 minutes, because of the previous thing and then what my friend said that stuck in my head, I started feeling that contraction in my gut. And this time I stopped and I examined it, and I realized, it just hit me. Oh my God, I feel like he's questioning my intelligence. And that's why I'm fighting him, right? Because I kept arguing with him. Like, I know. And as soon as I noticed that, it let go. And then it hit me. You know what? I'm a really smart person. And I know I'm a really smart person. And you know what? It's okay if he doesn't know that. It's okay if he thinks I'm dumb. And as soon as I thought that thought, he stopped mid-sentence. And he looked at me. And then he left without he didn't say another word. He just walked out and went to class. And of course, I went ahead and made the copies. Something shifted in my life in that moment. We, people of color, especially Black people, and especially women, and you put it together, and it's really true, people think we're dumb. And there are all kinds of things that we do to try to prove that we're not. We talk too loud in public places so that people can hear how smart we are. We resist anything that would suggest that we must not be very smart. We try to manage other people's vision of us, their how they see us. We try to manage the unmanageable. All kinds of things we do. I realized when this really came clear for me, like how strong a pattern this was, that I was so identified with the idea of being smart and being perceived. I needed to see me as smart, and I needed other people. Both of those were problems. And I saw, well, it came from my childhood, because as a kid, I was very poor. And the one thing I had was that I was smart. And to me, I had no other value in this world, right? Because I was devalued as Black, I was devalued as a girl, and I was devalued as poor. But I was smart. That was my one thing. And so I built my identity around that. And I didn't even really realize it. I mean, you're just living, right? You're not thinking about all this stuff as you're creating yourself in your mind and in the world. And I had incredible educational achievements. And so this continued to be reinforced. I got all kinds of opportunities as a result of being smart and being perceived as smart by others, right? All kinds of privileges. Then I realized that in college, I went to an Ivy League college. Actually, even before that, I went to a gifted and talented high school. And that was when I had to start meditating, because for the first time, I started doubting my intelligence, because I was surrounded by kids who had had a much more favorable educational background before me. They, leading up to them, they'd go into private schools, or they'd gone to schools in very rich neighborhoods. They'd had a lot of support. And I hadn't had that. And so I couldn't tell whether they were smarter than me or just better educated than me. But all I knew was I was struggling for the first time in my life with my academics. And thankfully, I found a book on meditation, and it said that if you did this technique, you would be smarter. And I was like, well, I need a book like that. So I did the technique, and it worked. I suddenly could do the work. I suddenly my grades started going up, and I started getting A's again. And I wound up getting into Ivy League colleges. You know, I only applied to 2 colleges because I got into one early, so I didn't have any backups, and I got into both of the schools I applied to. And so I had kind of redeemed myself. There was that threat, oh, maybe I'm not smart. Maybe I don't have any value then, right? Which means I'm not safe in the world, which means I'll be rejected from the community and left to wander by myself and die in the wilderness. Like, this sounds so extreme, and yet this is how our ego is. Our ego really is just this extreme and simplistic in its mortal fear of death. It's so afraid of so many different things. The type of meditation I happened to be doing was transcendental meditation, but all I really took from it was mantra meditation. Like, any kind of concentration meditation is pretty much what I was doing. Because you know, you can't learn much from a book on a practice, right? So all I did is I just came up with a mantra, and I just repeated the mantra over and over to myself for like 20 minutes every morning. So that grasping around this identity was threatened and recovered because I found a technique that could reestablish my value, right? So now I get to college, and now I'm at an Ivy League college, and guess what happens again? Now I'm with people who are even more privileged than, I mean, just the amount of privilege that these people had was just it was staggering. It was staggering. And in so many different ways. Like, I'm sitting in class, and I'm literally starving. Like, I'm hungry because I don't have enough money to buy food. And the person sitting in front of me is wearing a fur coat that's draped all over the filthy floor, and she doesn't even care. Like, that level, that kind of a gap. Plus, their educational preparation also had that big a difference. And these are like the brightest minds from all around the world, not just America. They're from all around the world, the most competitive educational backgrounds, right? Because money, it buys you access to higher quality education. Like, that's real. They get a different kind of education. So anyway, once again, I was threatened in so many ways. Like, my value was threatened. And eventually, over the time that I was there, I did wind up being fairly isolated. Mostly, it was largely choices that I was making, but I was having a very hard time adjusting. And I was struggling in a lot of classes, and then mostly because of just emotional turmoil of just, it was so hard being in that context and not having the emotional support that I needed, and really just not being competent to step into that world. I just didn't have enough life experience to be playing with these people who had been vacationing all over the world their entire lives, you know? So anyway, so I started going into just like a really bad kind of a pattern, and where the more I doubted myself, but none of this was happening consciously, because my ego was repressing this entire dynamic. I didn't know I was identified with my intellect. I didn't know that I thought that was the only value I had. I didn't know that I was afraid I wasn't actually as smart as I thought I was. I didn't know that I thought maybe I don't have any value. I didn't know that I felt like I'm going to be excluded from the human community. And now I'm actually starting to have that experience, because experience follows expectation, right? But that's what was happening. And little by little, I started really psychologically unraveling. It was really, really hard. Like, it got so that I was just in such a survival mode because there was just too much on me. And I decided to take a semester off, and I went to Boston. My best friend was in school there. So I went first for the summer. Then I met a boyfriend, and then I intended always to stay through the first semester, and he and I got an apartment together. And that was actually really good for me. He was actually really good for me. He was bad for me in some ways too, because he smoked a lot of pot, and my life does not work with pot in it. But it was in it when I was with him, right? So in that way, he wasn't good for me, but in some ways he was, because he showed me a value that I had that was not tied to my intellect, right? Which was that he just loved me just as the person that I was. He didn't have any displays of my intellect. He didn't know me in an academic setting whatsoever, because I wasn't in school while I knew him. He was in school, you know, that first semester. He took care of me. He just did so much for me. And And he was gorgeous. Really, really smoking hot. So which also, it gave me back a little of the self-esteem that I'd been losing the 2 years before that. And so anyway, it was many, 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 many years later before I really understood all of that. When I did go back to school, though, I suddenly went back with a lot of clarity. I started taking different kinds of classes, and suddenly I started getting A's again. And then because of that, I got into, and also I study well for organized tests. So on my LSATs, I got really high scores. And so I once again got into top law schools and scholarships and all that. I was like, I'm back. And so that's where so many years later, it's like a decade later, all this is happening with the Lama, who's again questioning my intelligence. He could find that was the pattern. It was the ego pattern that was most locking me into this really small world. I don't know if you guys can see like why this would be problematic. Like, do you see why this would be a problem? Like, even though intelligence is a positive thing, can you see how having that be your identity and where your self-worth comes from would be a problem? I hope that's clear. I don't know if I've made that point. Oh, you almost went to law school too? You know, Imani, I almost went to law school 3 years in a row. 3 years I kept getting, it was time to go and I would just like not go, and I would just like postpone or, apply again the next year. And then finally, after I got my master's in counseling, my mother came to my graduation and she's like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Now you have a master's and a law degree. I'm like, no, I don't have a law degree, Mom. And she's like, what are you talking about? Didn't you go to law school? And I'm like, no, I almost went to law school 3 years in a row, but I never went. And she's like, I told all my friends you were a lawyer. I said, well, go back now and tell them all I'm a therapist. Because that whole path was driving me crazy. But anyway, I hope that's really cool. Oh, you went to law school for 18 months. That's, I had the feeling, oh, thanks, Jacqueline. I had the feeling that I would like things about law school, but I would not like being a lawyer. Because if you think about it, being a lawyer, check this out, people. It's mostly a bunch of smart people where all of them have their ego identity around being smart. In fact, they all have it around being the smartest person in the room. And now they're just going to fight it out to see who is most smart. And that is their entire fucking life. Sound happy to you? No. I might have enjoyed law school, but I would not have enjoyed being a lawyer. That would have been hell on earth. Thank goodness. Even though I didn't understand anything I just explained to you back then, I was totally repressed. But I had that sense of a no. I kept applying because I didn't know what else to do. And every time it was time to go, I just couldn't go through with it. And I didn't know why. And I struggled. I mean, I still really struggled in life. I mean, I struggled badly. Those were the worst years of my entire life. You cannot even imagine how hard it was. It was so bad that at one point I lived in in Lower Nob Hill, which is their art galleries. At one point I was walking down the street and I looked in a window of a gallery. It was like a student art place. And there in the window was this huge picture of my face. But what I saw was a person who had no soul. She was a person that was just so lost, just truly just like an empty shell of a person. Someone had seen me walking down the streets of my neighborhood and thought I was so tragic that they painted a picture of me. And they were right. It was bad. And it stayed bad for a long time. And then eventually, I went to Bali, and sometime I'll tell you the stories about what that transition was like. I told you the story of like the whole trip that I took with my friend for her 35th birthday. And that was actually what eventually planted the seeds that eventually took me to Bali. And that was when my life really started to change. And then again, it was when I came back from Bali, I moved to New York, that this whole story that I told you with Lama Pema takes place. So the healing began. And that first part of the lesson was I had to stop identifying that my value is because of my intellect. And this is something that continues to come up. Oh, thank you, Gladys. Thank you. This is something that continues to come up for me in my life because it's such a deep pattern. It's like, yes, I did eventually learn to spot it in that moment when he was trying to teach me how to make photocopies again. In that moment, I could handle it, especially since in that moment it was just me, him, and his most advanced student who I knew, and I knew, it wasn't too big a gap. Like I could make that little bit of a leap of accepting that maybe he thought I wasn't smart, and that was okay, right? What would be very useful is to hear about where your emotional support came from. Nowhere. I had no emotional support. I had none. But then when I went to Bali, I started meditating and channeling, and that was the turning point, was connecting to spirit. That was my support. And to this very day, that's my primary support, even though now I have much more community than I had then. So, just to really wrap it up, and I want to super underline this because I don't know what your thing is. I don't know if your thing is about being intelligent. Maybe it's about having money. Maybe it's about being beautiful. I don't know what your thing is, right? But you got a thing. And whatever that thing is, that identity is keeping you stuck. Your energy is so contracted around protecting that identity that anything that challenges that identity, it will stop you in your tracks. Someone can put a monkey wrench in you just like that, just by poking at that core identity of where you get your value. You've got to let it go. You've got to let go of the idea that your value comes from anything about you. Your value is inborn. All the value you will ever have, you had the very moment you were born. And it is the only kind you will ever be able to depend on. Any place else that you are taking your value will at some point be under threat. And once it is, again, manifestation follows expectation. So you're going to start a process. Even if all this is repressed, you're still going to do it. You're going to start a process that causes all your worst fears to come true. All the things that you fear will happen if people don't see your value, you will slide and slide and slide down that path. And there are times, it's more like this, right? There are times you come out of it, but the only way you really get off that slide is by letting go of the identity itself and being able to still feel your worth. Can you feel your value? Can you feel that you deserve to be rich? I really want you to sit here with me for a moment and just let that sink in. And I want you to be honest. Will you let yourself be rich? Do you deserve it? Have you earned it? I didn't earn it. I did a lot of stuff. I did a lot of hard work and a lot of suffering, but that is not what earned me my abundance when it came. At the time that it came, I'd actually stopped hustling. I wasn't working that much at the time that it finally came. What I had done was simply let it in. I let myself feel worthy of having a bunch of white men working to make me rich while I sat on a beach. I had to feel worthy of that. I had to let that happen. And when I did, it did. When I did, it happened. So I want to ask you again, it's hard. I try to keep positive. I hear you. It's especially hard if the identity that you're trying to let go of, that you're getting which is where you're getting your worth right now, if it's not even conscious to you. It's I don't want to say it's impossible, but it is very unlikely that you're going to be able to let go of something that you don't even know is there. So what that teacher did for me that was such a benefit, even though he never did accept me as his student, never. And eventually I did wind up moving away and I was just whatever. And then I didn't want any teachers. Until last week I told you how I met my heart teacher. But he did help me so much in that he was able to show me situationally where I was holding on. What was and now I can see, yes, I did have that experience of, because of not being perceived as smart enough and doubting myself that I was smart enough, having my life fall apart and winding up completely ostracized. I did have that experience. So those fears were proven true. So which only made me clamp down on that identity even more. That's why I could never stop working. I was always trying to prove that I was not just smart, but smart enough to succeed, right? And yet for many of us, and I'm speaking to you personally right now, for many of us, you know, we are very smart, and yet we have we are what they call late bloomers, yeah? But we're late bloomers not because we're not smart enough. We think that, we unconsciously think that, but that's not why. And our inability, it's too painful to face. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe that's why I'm not succeeding. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't actually have any value. And if other people find that out, then what's going to happen to me? That's too terrifying and painful to face, because it's where our identity is coming from. And yet this is so me, and I'm trying so hard to break from it. I hear you, divine intervention. Oh, you're welcome. This is accused measurable. Yeah, definitely replay it from the beginning. Definitely replay it from the beginning. So ultimately, it's so key if you can find what is the most important thing about yourself to you. Like if someone asks you to describe yourself and start with your favorite thing, and you weren't trying to like, you know, think up what you should say. You're just being honest, right? What would that thing be? Would it be that you're so smart? Would it be that you're so hardworking? Would it be that you're so beautiful? Would it be that whatever? What is it? What's your thing? Where does your value come from? And whatever that is, that's your Achilles heel. It's not your strength. It's your weakness. How about that? You gotta let it go. You gotta let that go. And in that space, connect with your own spiritual self so that you can see yourself the way it sees you. And it sees you for your intrinsic value. It sees you in your perfection, born perfect. It doesn't need a reason. The sun does not need a reason to shine on you and make you feel the way it makes you feel. The sun doesn't need a reason to shine on a plant and make it grow. The sun shines on everyone, and it gives its love to everyone. And that is spirit, and that is truth. That is your true value. You are worthy of the sun's light, and you are worthy of every penny, every dollar, every million, every love, everything you have ever wanted. You are worthy. But in order to let it in, you've got to see yourself the way spirit sees you, and you cannot see yourself the way spirit sees you while you're too busy seeing yourself the way that you have been trained you must be perceived in order to be safe. As long as you are coming from a defensive position, you are outside the realm of how spirit sees you, because it knows that you can never be threatened, that who you are cannot be threatened. Therefore, there is no defense. Crystal, this is heavy, heavy, heavy. I'm vacillating between walking away from a life I've created that is closely linked to my identity, which is based in trauma, and staying in it because of this is the business I created, because I'm exhausted. Oh, Vernita, I'm glad that this is resonating for you too. Crystal, girlfriend, you just said what you need to do. You just said it. So now just be gentle. Love yourself. Don't push yourself. Love yourself into what comes next for you. But you just said what you need to do. So just let it happen. Yeah? Baby steps. Just one little step at a time. It doesn't need to hurt to be working. You just need to be moving in the right direction. However many steps it takes, if you're going that way, but you're trying to get somewhere over there, the most important thing is just first stop moving in that direction and turn it around. That's it, right? And then just one little step at a time. You will get there soon enough. And of course, I'm really big on being spirit-led. That's the only thing that's ever worked for me. And so that's what I encourage others to do too, is to really practice. I know a lot of you did the 21-day manifestation challenge, and that last practice, it's all about basically practicing being spirit-led, okay, I'm going to practice now, right? And that's training for your life when you're not really thinking about it too much, to still know how to be spirit-led. And ultimately, I think that's just the thing. I could tell you things, but I cannot even touch on what your spirit can do for you. And so that's the relationship you've really got to cultivate. I'll try to highlight it, right? I'll try to make it clearer and more obvious to you, but ultimately that's the relationship that will heal your life. Love yourself into what comes next. Absolutely. I'm so glad you're doing this, especially at the end of the weekend. Oh, good. I'm glad. I have to admit, sometimes I think, should I do it? Is anybody going to come? Am I going to just be talking to myself? Which is depressing. But I really, really appreciate you all being here live. I really do. Thank you. And for, the reactions and stuff, I thank you so much for that. Oh, hey, Sabrista. Oh, I'm so glad you came by. It's good to see you, darling. Hey, Coretta. Oh, Katrina, I'm glad this is resonating for you. Okay, so obviously this is a big topic, and I don't want to go on too long. I'm actually about 10 minutes longer than I want these to be. So I'm going to peace out. But I'm glad that this connects for you guys, because this is a big one. And like I said, once we can undo this, it really opens up the floodgates, because this is the core thing. And we can't say when we undo it as in it's all gone, because like I said, even that example was from like 15 years ago. And I'm still taking off layers. I made a lot of progress when I took off that first layer, but with every layer that comes off, I make even more progress. And I don't know when it ends. I don't know that I ever get to the center of that onion, but every layer counts, let me tell you. Every layer that comes off is pretty sweet. Okay, so don't underestimate the value of simply being on the path pointed in the right direction, however slow you'll go. Because again, you can never move faster than the slowest part of you is able to go. So you have to love that vulnerability. And there's some exercises I guess I want to share with you guys. Sometimes it's hard to just know where to put stuff, because I've got so many things going on. There's here on the page, and then there's the Destiny Accelerator group. People of Color Manifesting Destiny group. Then there's the Destiny Accelerator group, where I share the most material, but that's the membership program of very few people who are just like working really tightly together. So sometimes, like when I get into the deep exercises, it's hard to kind of share it like this. And so I'm still figuring out a little bit of how I convey to you all, like, how do you get this done, right? But I know that at least I can give you stories from my life of how it happened for me. And then hopefully you can extract from that, and it opens up something in you. And then the things that you need just start coming to you. That's my hope. Okay. Let me turn it. Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Gladys. Even if it's just you and me. Well, thank you, Crystal. I'm gonna count on you then. No pressure. No pressure. Imani song Gentle with Myself. Oh, I don't know that I know that song. If you can find that, Imani, will you post it in the group? Excuse me, you guys. I'm having crazy allergies right now. All right. I think we're good. Thank you all so much for being here live. And if you share it, if you react, all of that helps more people see it. And I really do want, more of our sisters to let this stuff go and be able to open to our true birthright. I'm so serious when I say that. It's not just a catchy phrase. I really mean, I want us all to claim what is genuinely our birthright. And only we can do that. No one can do it for us. And so that's what this is all about, is getting each of us to a point where we can, in fact, do that. Okay. All right, you guys. I hope I'll see you next week. All right. Bye-bye.